Hello and welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Miranda and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. So as you see from the title, today's video is all about Guinevere and her knightly lovers. And we're going to talk a lot about how the other world and the fairy energy is threaded through the story of Guinevere's lovers. As this is my last video of May, I just had to do something appropriately May-like. So first we're gonna do the normal little disclaimers. I do it all at the beginning of all my videos of little updates. I did mention this in my previous video because I did talk about updates through that entire video, but I recently added in a new service to my website, and that is mentorship sessions, mentoring sessions, and they are 1 hour long each. They cost $55, and you can order one, and then we will set up a video call for a day that works for both of us in the near future, and you'll get to get my advice on all sorts of different fairy and spirituality topics. If you're interested, that along with all of the other offerings in my shop are linked down below. I also do offer several different tarot card reading options, and I run an entire Patreon. So you can go ahead and click the link to the Patreon down below as well. So now that I've done my little spiel about my business, let's get into the topic at hand. And this was inspired largely because recently I've been rereading this book, The Once and Future Queen, Guinevere and Arthurian Legends by Nicole Evelina. I love this book. I read this book 5 years ago for the first time and just was moved by how beautifully written it is and how much love and respect for Guinevere as a figure is put into this book, because she's so often a figure of the Arthuriad that just gets forgotten about or put off to the side or disrespected in one way or another. And I hate that because I love Guinevere. I always have. I'm in fact a priestess of Guinevere because Guinevere is and always has been a fairy queen goddess in addition to a figure in the Arthurian legends. So I love this. It's a really well-sourced academic book. She goes through Guinevere's portrayals from the very beginning of the Arthurian legends all the way through modern works. And she also wrote the Guinevere's Tale trilogy, which is an excellent modern version of Guinevere's story that I absolutely love. I actually just reread that as well. I read these both like back to back 5 years ago. So I reread that, and then I just had to reread this book, which is just such an amazing journey into Guinevere's nature as a character and a figure within Arthurian legends. So, what do I mean when I say, as the title says, Guinevere and her knightly lovers, or her fairy knightly lovers more specifically? What is a fairy knight? Well, Guinevere's lovers in the Arthurian legends seem to, more often than not, have an otherworldly tie to them. Okay, let's go back to the very beginnings of the Arthuriad, and her lover in that would have been Mordred. He was one of the earliest. There are also a lot of early versions that have Kay being the lover, which again, way to hit Arthur where it hurts. These are people very close to Arthur. Kay, for those who might not know, is Arthur's sort of adoptive brother because he was raised by Kay's family. Sir Ector was his foster father, making Kay his foster brother. They were very, very close. And Kay remained close to Arthur for the entirety of the Arthurian legends. So having Kay betray him like that is as bad as Lancelot later, or maybe even worse because of how long Kay was this really important, really respected, and really beloved figure in Arthur's life. So it's very heavy betrayal. I think Kay is probably one of the lovers that has the least connection to the whole idea of being a fairy knight. because he's not really otherworldly, except for being the son of the family Merlin himself chose Arthur to be raised by. So you could say maybe Merlin chose a family that had some connections to Fae, to Avalon, and what have you. But we don't get a lot of solid proof of that. So I can't necessarily call Kay a very fairy knightly lover, but he is there, and I wanted to mention it. But otherwise, it is Mordred. And Mordred is either Arthur's nephew or his son, depending on the telling. More often than not, in the modern, we hear of Mordred being Arthur's son. And that's usually how I think of him, because it's just so prevalent, this idea of Mordred being the son of Arthur and one of his half-sisters. Often it's Morgause or the other unnamed queen, who is the wife of the King of Orkney, King Lot of Orkney. Or, in a lot of very modern interpretations, it's automatically Morgan Le Fay. And that's the most common one. It's reused over and over and over again. I do want to note it's not usually Morgan who's the mother in an earlier context. But now, especially from the time when Marion Zimmer Bradley published The Mists of Avalon, that's even more firmly asserted that it is Morgan Le Fay who is the mother of Mordred. So whoever you view as Mordred's mother, he is Arthur's son in most of the modern variants of the Arthurian legends. So it may seem kind of strange. Like, why would you want to marry or bed your father's wife? Yes, she's not related to you in any way, but there's still the weirdness of she's clearly going to be older than you. Sometimes a lot older, sometimes not that much older, because there are some versions where Guinevere is much, much younger than Arthur. So she's really only like 5 to 10 years older than Mordred, but still, it's weird. It gets very strange. And we have versions where Mordred full stop is in a relationship with Guinevere. He took her to be his queen. They had children together. Yes, there are versions where Guinevere is the mother of Mordred's children. Crazy stuff. And Mordred very much fits the fairy knight archetype because he is the son of a woman with fairy ties. Whether it's Morgause or Morgan Le Fay, both have lineage connected to being fairy. And he's often got just really ill intentions. Just throughout all of these different versions of the legends, we see him having very bad intentions. Sometimes Guinevere wants to be his wife, sometimes she doesn't. But no matter what, it's just this really crazy, crazy story that is really mind-boggling. As time has gone on, we've gotten away from the idea of Guinevere consenting to being with Mordred, and she often chooses to leave Camelot rather than be with him, and that's when she enters the convent. I much prefer that because it's very uncomfy. A lot of the Mordred interactions you see with Guinevere are very uncomfortable. But I get it as a literary device, and I certainly even get it in a mythological sense, because we have this way back in Oedipus. So going to ancient Greece, we have this story of you kill your father, marry your mother. In this case, stepmother, but the vibe is still there. So this evolves, and another important person who is a knightly lover of Guinevere is in fact Edur, which is the name in like the French romances, but in the Welsh we would know him as Edur ap Neath, the brother of Gwyneth. So we have literally an otherworldly lord being this lover figure for Guinevere. And I do want to note that Guinevere herself has ties to this, ties to the other world, to the summer lands, because in most like modern versions, we hear her being the Princess Guinevere, the daughter of King Leodegrance of Scotland. And that has some fairy connotations in and of itself, but it leaves it pretty open. In older versions, when we go back to the Welsh Celtic triads, we have Guinevere being the daughter of several different fairy lords, including fairy lords who are known as Lords of Summer or Lords of the Summer Lands. The Summer Lands being a term for the other world used in the Arthurian legends. And that's why the idea of Guinevere getting kidnapped so often is so tied to this idea of an otherworldly fairy queen being taken back to the other world by her father or her former lover who want her back when she's married a human. And we do see that throughout fairy lore, and it does fit Guinevere really, really well, actually. And that leads us into Meleagant or Melwas or any other variation of that name. It's always the same figure. He is the king of the Summerlands, and he is a famous kidnapper of Guinevere's. Often he is a really, really evil figure and is very abusive towards her even. And she gets rescued either by Arthur or most often by Lancelot. And that's telling right there. She's being taken back into the otherworld by this otherworldly king, but not an otherworldly king she ever had a relationship with. Not someone she wanted to go back to. She wanted to stay in the court of Camelot and remain queen. So she's taken against her will into this court. Which reminds me greatly of Guinevere. Guinevere's story right there reminds me greatly of Rhiannon. How she had an otherworldly lover she did not want to marry and chose Poosh instead, and they had to circumvent that engagement she was trying to be forced, that her father tried to force her into, to marry. This is very similar for Guinevere. She's being taken by this otherworldly king who she doesn't love, doesn't want to marry, and she needs to be rescued. And again, very telling that often it's not Arthur. There are some versions where it is Arthur that comes and rescues her, but more often than not, it's Lancelot that comes and rescues her. And Lancelot is her most famous and iconic fairy knight lover. How is Lancelot fae in any way, you may ask? Lancelot may not be fae in origin. We don't get that really proven to us, but he was raised by the Lady of the Lake. See, in most versions, Lancelot is orphaned, and when he's orphaned, he's given into the care of the Lady of the Lake, and she raises him to be the ideal knight. And this, again, plays very heavily into traditional Celtic lore, where it was actually fairy queens and warrior women who would raise warriors and knights until they were ready to fulfill their destiny. So that's what the Lady of the Lake does for Lancelot. And the other really iconic example would be of Cuchulainn in Irish legend, in the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology. He is raised up and taught by a warrior woman who's a fairy woman, and she's the one that imbues in him all of this skill. So yeah, that's right on par. And we could even say that, okay, Lancelot in many ways probably grew from the whole idea of Idir and Apneath and Idir, who were genuinely lover energy to Guinevere. Like, she loved them and it was reciprocal, into Lancelot, who is a very much so ideal knightly figure. He is strong and intelligent and very, very capable. And he's always doing amazing tasks. He's always rescuing people and doing great feats, and has such devoted love to Guinevere that it would never stray. And of course, we do know he does stray, but not of his own volition. the whole like getting Elaine pregnant with Galahad thing, she had a glamour cast on herself to look like Guinevere. He thought he was sleeping with Guinevere. Really messed up. Equally as messed up as Uther Pendragon having Merlin cast the glamour on him so that he could seduce Igraine and conceive Arthur. Yeah, these two like iconic figures, Arthur himself and Galahad, the Grail Knight, both conceived with very, very dubious consent. Let's just leave it at that. It's crazy, but Lancelot's devotion and ultimate love of Guinevere is so beautiful. So much so that I myself referenced Lancelot and Guinevere in my wedding vows to my husband, which actually our 4th wedding anniversary just passed. I'm recording it right around our anniversary, but this video goes live the next week. So happy anniversary, Andrew. I don't know if you're watching this video, but happy anniversary. In any case, it's so romantic to have this figure of Lancelot being so devoted to Guinevere. And in a lot of versions, Guinevere definitely loves him back. Sometimes it only shows her jealousy, and that's often due to writers who didn't really understand women, and often due to wanting to portray courtly love accurately and doing that at the expense of the character development. But there's a lot that can be said about that. However, this consistent theme of this otherworldly fairy knight influence as a counterpoint to Arthur as this ideal king who's very much supposed to be human, or mostly so. Clearly, he has fairy influence and fairy lineage on his mother's side, but his whole energy is supposed to be very much so firmly rooted in this world, not in the other world, until his death after Camlan, and then he goes to Avalon. But before then, he's very rooted in this world. So it's endlessly fascinating to me. And I think it does just show such a depth to Guinevere and so many hints to her nature, her earlier nature as truly a fairy queen goddess who is much older and much more powerful than we would have thought. In any case, I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have enjoyed it, please do like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, and I will see you in the next video. Have a wonderful week. Bye now.